Good afternoon, everybody. It's Sharon Spurlock from the Family Support Department at the St. Louis Arc, and I'm really happy you could be joining us today to hear our siblings speak up. Siblings are one of my favorite group of folks to talk to because they have such a wonderful role in the lives of their family members with disabilities and a really unique role as well. We know that siblings might have the longest relationship of anybody with the person with a disability. So we want to make sure we support siblings and that we learn from them as well. So I have a cool panel with me here today. I am gifted to have 4 siblings with me here today. And so we're going to start off by having them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about them and their families. And so I'm going to start, Patrick, with you. Would you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Patrick Rickert. I'm a research fellow at Washington University, finishing up my PhD in political science. My family has 3 children. I have an older sister and a younger brother, Joshua, who has Down syndrome.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And Morgan?
Hi, my name is Morgan. I'm currently a student at Washington University getting my MSW, and I'm a former St. Louis Arc intern by about 2 weeks or something. I just ended my internship, and I'm a current volunteer, and my family is blended at this point because my mother passed away, so my father remarried. So I have 2 stepbrothers, and then I grew up with 2 younger siblings. One sister, and then my youngest sibling has autism spectrum disorder and is about 20 years old now.
Fantastic. You've got all kinds of cool dynamics going on in your family. Thank you, Morgan. I see Irene joined us. Irene, tell us a little bit about you and your family.
Hi, everyone. I'm Irene. I'm currently an undergraduate student. I'm in my junior year at Washington University in St. Louis, and I'm studying neuroscience. I have one little sister. Her name is Shannon, and she's 15 years old, and she has autism and intellectual disability.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, Irene. I'm so glad you could join us. And last but not least, LaWanda, you have a fun family dynamic. Tell us a little bit about you and your family.
Hello, I am LaWanda. I am a little sister to my 43-year-old brother who has intellectual disabilities, and I am a mother to a 17-year-old girl who also has intellectual disabilities. I believe she is on the autism spectrum disorder, and as of now, we are actually going through testing, so hopefully we'll get a few more answers this time around. That's about it for now.
All right. Well, that's awesome. So we've got siblings that range quite a range, both from each of you, but also your brothers and sisters. And I'm curious if you can remember when you learned that your brother or sister had a disability, what your family told you, or what that experience might have been like. And if you want to start the question, you can raise your hand, or I'll just randomly pick on somebody. Do you remember, did your family specifically talk to you about your siblings' autism, or how did you learn about that?
So I don't remember having a sit-down conversation about what the diagnosis meant, but I do remember my family having a lot of issues with him having sensory overreactions in public and lots of tantrums when he was younger and delayed speech. And so we sort of got the idea that he had problems early on with things that weren't, would amount to a disability of some kind. But I was pretty young at the time too, because we're only 3 years apart. So it's sort of been part of my understanding of my family forever. But I wish I did get that conversation, or maybe that my family talked to a professional together about what it meant, because I never got that opportunity. So
Irene's ready to answer.
Yeah, so I was 5 when my sister was born, and then she was diagnosed with autism 2 years later. So when she was 2 and I was around 7 years old. And I think similar to Morgan, there were a lot of clues, along the way that something was, just something was a little different about my sister. I had a lot of friends who had siblings of a similar age as my little sister. And so I would notice, well, when I went over to their house to play, their siblings would already be speaking in full sentences and starting to interact with other people. Whereas my sister was very content with babbling and kind of being by herself. And so there was definitely a difference that I noticed even before she got officially diagnosed. And then I think what really kind of solidified it was that we started to going to a lot of doctors and a lot of different, having a lot of different meetings with people at her school and so teachers and stuff. And I was always my parents always brought me along to those visits and to all of those appointments. So I was always very kind of like kept up to date about whatever was going on with my sister's life. And I'm really grateful for that now because it kind of gave me it kind of helped me gain like firsthand knowledge on how to understand her condition and how to best interact with her and like what we needed to do to, again, like Morgan was saying, to make sure she isn't suffering from like sensory overload, or to make sure that she's comfortable and that she has her personal space and all of that. So it was definitely kind of a learning curve, and it was something that just kind of became normal quite quickly.
It's really interesting. It's almost like you guys had opposite experiences. You both saw the same things happening, but you were very embedded in the doctor's appointments and all that kind of thing. And Morgan was sort of figuring it out as they went along. So that's really interesting. Patrick or LaWanda, do you guys want to chime in on this? Patrick?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I had a bit of a different experience because my brother has Down syndrome. We knew from the beginning that he had this developmental disability, but I was about 2 years old when he was born. And so there was never a time when I didn't know about it. And much like Irene, I was always at the doctor appointments. So I don't know that I had as precise an understanding until he got older, but it was always clear to me that he had a disability.
Okay. And LaWanda, you were going to jump in too, I think.
Yes, ma'am. So my brother and I are we're about 6.5 years apart, which is quite a bit. When I was already born, he was already here. And he just was a really good big brother, fun and all that. I didn't realize that he probably had a disability. I remember my mom, she used to say, oh, he is just slow. He's slow. Like that was the terminology that was used. But I also had older parents. My parents probably are older than the people on that are answering questions as well. And he's older too. So I just don't think that using certain, words or anything like that was, something that they used. And also maybe culturally, that could be a difference to just say that someone was slow and they just kind of don't learn the same. But my mom didn't even use that. And then I remember she said, I think he was held back in maybe kindergarten or first grade because he didn't speak. And he was always really quiet when we were kids. Like we talked and we played, but like around other people or at church and things like that, he was always just real quiet to himself. But my father was too. So I didn't really think anything of it, as it being an issue or a problem. It wasn't until I got older and into school, maybe like, I think he graduated when I was in like 7th grade. And so I remember helping him with his homework when I was in middle school and he was already in high school. And so it was somewhere around, middle school that I realized that, hey, I can help him with his work. And, it was kind of like weird, but it's always been normal, so to speak,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So your experience was a little bit different because he didn't have any real challenges when he was younger that were in your relationship. It was more academic. So it sounds like you had an opportunity to really enjoy him as a big brother. While we're talking about kind of this age range, I'd love to hear about, like, what do you think were the great things about having a sibling with a disability when you were young, when you were a little kid?
well, since I finished, I'll just jump in here. Um, I had two older big brothers. One of them, the one that lives with me now that I care for, and I had an older one who would come over every now and then. That was my father's son, and just being the only girl, that was kind of. I didn't get like picked on, I guess, or bugged as much because they just loved me and I was the baby. I was the baby and I was the only girl. So, I got to have a lot of fun with them. It wasn't until I got older that I missed the big brother relationship that I felt like I should have had, when it came to dating or things like that. He wasn't someone that was, checking out my boyfriends or anything like that. And by that time, our father had passed away. And so I missed out on having that big brother interaction that some girls often wish they didn't have, but I wish that I did. And I wish that he would have had an opportunity to rag on. Maybe I wouldn't have met some of the guys I would have had he, had the ability, to be that big brother thing that some people don't want to have.
Very interesting. Yeah, it can be a gift and a curse sometimes getting what you get. That's interesting. I think all of you guys are ready to jump in on this. Irene, did you want to go next?
Yeah, my sister's one of my best friends. So growing up with her, it was just always fun to, even if she can't speak and she can't communicate the way that, you and I communicate, doesn't mean that we don't all like have our secret way, like our secret language, and like we communicate by touch and we communicate, just by kind of like feeling each other out that way. So I just, my sister always growing up had a lot of energy. And so we would like, I just have so many memories of us just like choreographing like dance routines and stuff. And now I'm there's a rec center at WashU and I'm a dance instructor there. And I still use like some of the same routines that like my sister and I would jump around to and like make up when we were younger. And so there's a lot of things that I can't do with her, but there are also things that we love to do together and that, helps us stay close too.
Cool. Morgan?
Yeah, so I think knowing people with disabilities is always a gift because they always, or at least sometimes, see the world differently and do things differently in a way that teaches you about what is what should be normal and maybe what about normalcy is weird. And my little sibling, uh, he was always really ready to entertain anyone, and he was very hyper fixated on SpongeBob when we were younger. And he communicated by like learning from people on TV, I think. And he would memorize whole episodes of SpongeBob and then recite them for everyone on the bus when we were riding to school, and we lived out in the country, so we had like an hour-long bus ride, which was crazy. But it was a gift to have someone who's that ready to entertain around all the time. And then I also remember just, most people are not excited to go to school, but to him, he loved the routine. He hit his alarm in the morning and he would literally go, woohoo, and like be ecstatic to get on with the day. And that changed my perspective a little, I think, when I was younger.
It's a very interesting take on it. I'm going to circle back to that, I think, but I want to give Patrick a chance.
Yeah. So growing up with Joshua was great. Having a sibling is a very special relationship. Like Sharon said, you spend basically more time with them than anyone else. And my brother similarly had some problems with communication, but he and I developed our own language that only he and I knew. And so we really got to understanding each other in a way that even my parents couldn't. And so that was really fun. I think we're going to get into the frustrations a little later, but it's it's a great relationship and it's remarkable.
Well, let's just go ahead and talk about some of those frustrations, Patrick, especially as you think about it from your childhood and from school, because I think kids can be mean at school and trying to navigate that. And some of you weren't necessarily at school at the same time as your siblings. Some of you were, but what were some of the things that were difficult or frustrating for you, Patrick?
Sure. So one thing is, as a kid, even in middle school, you get kind of embarrassed at having this sibling who is different. When he was a little bit younger, and I would have to change his diaper, and if my friends were over, that felt mortifying, and I wanted to try and hide it. Uh, like you said, there were people that picked on him, and I, really wanted to defend him, but was also a bit scared to go against the group. You get a little angry at how difficult it is to communicate, uh, and that's one thing I want to emphasize to any siblings watching this is, these are normal, okay emotions to have, and it doesn't mean you don't love your sibling.
I appreciate that. And you know what? My brothers do not have disabilities, intellectual disabilities, but I think most of us have had that kind of frustration with a sibling, and maybe it's just magnified in some ways when your sibling has a disability. I don't know. Irene, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I would say for me, probably the biggest challenge was um, coming to terms with the idea that in my family and in my culture, my parents' culture, having a child with a disability, any kind of disability, is a severe stigma, and even more so if it is an intellectual disability. So there would be, growing up when we would have, you know, the occasions when people came over or we went over to other places, things like that. It was very jarring to like be a young kid and realize that like other people, other adults are uncomfortable with talking with trying to interact with my sister. And so that was something I didn't understand for a long time. And it was enough. I realized it enough to the point where my parents were like, listen, like, I think there's just some distance that we need to keep from certain people or who just don't accept my sister in a certain way and who don't just who aren't comfortable dealing with her. And that's not the kind of people we want her to be around either, So that was a really difficult decision when I was younger, and thankfully, there not everyone is like that, and I think nowadays more and more people are aware of the fact that there are tons of disabilities. There are tons of people, who have varying levels and backgrounds and things like that. So I think that people nowadays tend to be a lot more open and like willing to um, even if they don't previously know someone with a disability, they're at least willing to try it out and keep an open mind and things like that. So yeah, that was definitely something that was a bit jarring and had to
Yeah.
deal.
That sounds like it's sort of a gift and a curse too, where you are able to kind of see behind the facade of who some people are by the way in which they interacted with your sister, but at the same time, it impacted your relationship. So I can see that for a young person would be very, very difficult. And Morgan, I bet your experience was possibly even more challenging. You said that your sibling had some behavioral outbursts when they were young.
They they were challenging. Sometimes it would be like we were on a trip and then he would be overwhelmed and my father would have to take him to the car and outbursts in public. It sort of relates to what Patrick was saying. It's about being embarrassed, and it's normal when you're younger to feel embarrassed of your siblings in general, but then sometimes if there's something that makes them stand out a little bit more, it can be extra mortifying in some ways. But sometimes the behavioral outbursts were positive in a way because he would stand up for himself when he was being picked on. And it was in a way that most people were empathetic. But I remember being put into the caretaker role for him when I was very young as the oldest sibling. And one memory I have is being punished for him drawing on the cabinets because my babysitter wasn't sure how to punish him. And so I had to get sent to my room because I didn't stop him. And so it is challenging being viewed as responsible for your sibling that young just in general. And then when even adults sometimes aren't sure how to handle situations, that can be a little bit challenging in combination. So I think that sums up that experience.
Gosh, yes, that's really well researched. That whole caregiver phenomenon where siblings that have a brother or sister with a disability are often view themselves as a caregiver in addition to anybody else having that view, and it really kind of shapes their life trajectory as they move forward, thinking about those kinds of things. I'd like to talk just a little bit about the parents because you guys have an opportunity here, siblings, to talk to moms and dads that maybe they still have younger siblings. What are some things that you think that your parents did really well in helping you understand what your role was as a sibling, or maybe what were some things you wish happened differently?
So in my situation, like I feel like culturally it is understood that you care for your siblings regardless, you know what I mean, disability or not. And I think in ways he took care of me how he knew how to. And as I realized that he needed, more of my help, I speak up for him a lot. He just doesn't talk a lot. And I would be afraid that people would easily be able to talk over him or take advantage of him just because either he doesn't speak up for himself and also because cognitively may not understand what is being said to him. When I was younger, I did find myself standing up for him a lot. We were church kids. We went to church. And I remember a young man like pushed him, or I remember saying, or he said something, I'm sure derogatory, because my brother was always the older one, but, he just did not talk a lot. And when you don't talk a lot, people tend to pick on you even for that reason, whether you have a disability or not. And I remember stepping in front of him. Now, we're not very tall people, so he's a little taller than me, but I remember stepping in front of him and saying, hey, if you have something to say to him, you need to say it to me first, and feeling like I had to defend him because there was nobody else that was going to do it for him. And even now as an adult, both of our parents actually have passed away. It's been 10 years for my mother and about 27 years or so for my, and so it's always just been, and like, it's funny because no one asked me to take him on. No one said, oh, he has to live. We always have lived together all of our entire lives. We've never been apart. So when our mother passed, things just kept going. He lives with me now. I am interested in seeing if he can live, on his own eventually. But, in my family, it's almost just like you just became a caretaker by default. You know what I mean? And there was no one else who would have taken on the role. Not that I could have seen. We were a very close-knit, small family. So it's just something that was understood. It is slightly frustrating sometimes because I didn't ask and no one asked me if this is something I wanted to do. But yes, I do feel obligated to care for him. And at times I have to remember that I am not obligated. And if at any time I want to change that dynamic, I have the ability to do so and not have to feel bad about it. Those are things that I've had to learn along the way. And I'm not to take over, but you did ask about parents. And so I am a parent. And if I had an opportunity, I don't have another child, but if I did, I find myself wanting to explain my daughter's condition to the children that are around us, even though they're not her siblings. And that would be like my niece and her god brother. But also I've decided that I'm not going to do that because they treat her just the way they do. And I don't want them to feel, children have a tendency to feel like they have to be nice. You know what I mean? And I wouldn't want any of them to feel like they had to have pity on my daughter because I didn't have pity on my brother. My mom, like we were like, there wasn't a difference. You know what I mean? My mom never said, well, don't do that. You know, he doesn't understand. She didn't do any of that, you know? So my advice would be, don't allow your children or even the children around your children to have pity, because they are not anybody to feel sorry for. They are people just like we are, and they learn differently, or some of them look different. But I think the thing is that if we teach children how to care and love and appreciate people's differences, then they won't be so, you know, far out when it comes to seeing people that could be different, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I hope that answered the question.
It does. It sounds like your parents really set that bar, that he was your brother and you guys were going to, interact together as brothers and sisters, and that the disability was sort of not an important part of that conversation. I guess the flip side of it is, now that you're in a role where you are a caregiver as well as a sibling, are there things that you wish that your parents would have told you or done so that you would be able to move forward now in a different way?
I wish I was more prepared, by not knowing, even his like diagnosis, or with my parents or my mother mainly, because she was, you know, still around, not digging deeper to get a formal diagnosis of some sort, besides just being told he has intellectual disabilities. I believe he's on the autism spectrum disorder as well. But he has always been very, very independent. He takes the bus to and from anywhere he wants to go. Like, he's, you know, besides him not talking much and maybe, you know, not knowing things as much cognitively, but like what he lacks in, it's amazing. I remember when we were younger, he could do math really well. And I always thought that was really neat that he could do math. He used to draw a little bit, and like, he can get anywhere in St. Louis on Metro by state. He doesn't need call a ride, and he enjoys, I know he enjoys having that independence and being able to go when he wants to go and things like that. But I wish I was more prepared and I would have known what I was dealing with, because now being older and we are older, there's a lot of things that I'm really having to make up time for when it comes to services. He did not have a lot of services growing up, so I'm trying to get those now, and it's pretty difficult because you just don't know a lot.
Okay. Well, that was a great answer. I appreciate that. So I'm going to circle back. So I want to know about what your parents you think really did well to prepare you, and what you might need some additional assistance with.
Two things that I think my parents did really well is one difficulty of having a sibling with a disability, especially one that has a lot of doctor's appointments, is the siblings sort of get pushed to the side. They don't really, all of the parents' attention is focused on the child, correctly or incorrectly. And so I think it was nice that even when Joshua was in the hospital, even when they had to take him to speech therapy, occupational therapy, there was still this emphasis on the rest of us. And I will, for not the last time today, make a pitch for Sibshops, which is one of the programs that the ARC puts on that Irene and I volunteer with, where it is in part just for the sibling to be the center of attention for once. And secondly, I think a great thing that my parents did was to prepare me to be an advocate and caregiver for Joshua. One of the things that I know is Joshua will probably never be able to live on his own, and will probably end up living with me. And so I'll be his guardian. I'll need to know all of his medical information, his diet, all of that, and really just how to speak up for him. It's something you learn as a sibling when you get this protective instinct when they're being picked on. But, sometimes you need that because people will disregard your sibling. And I think that advocacy is something I'm very grateful for.
Irene, did you want to do a Sibshop shout out too? I saw you grin.
I was, yes. So here's a second pitch to Sibshops, Patrick. Yes, I was also going to mention that as something that I wish I would have been a part of when I was younger. It's such an amazing opportunity, especially because I know that when I was younger, when talking to my friends and hearing their stories about their siblings, it's just it's hard to empathize, especially as a younger kid, when you don't have personal experience with something. That's something that you learn as you get older. And so especially for younger kids, and the ones in sib shops tend to range from like anywhere from like 5, 6 years old to like teens. I think it's a great opportunity to meet other siblings like you. And like Patrick said, now they're at the focus of, they're at the center of attention, and they can share their stories. And it's not just about talking about their sibling and their relation to that. It's also just to meet new friends, and they happen to have similar backgrounds to you. So it's a really amazing thing. And I would highly encourage anyone to do that.
Yeah, so Sibshops, just to tell everybody out there, it's a national model to support siblings who have a brother or sister with a disability. We offer that right now for 6 to 12-year-olds, but we're hoping to do a teen Sib gathering sometime either this summer or in the fall. And it's exactly what Irene and Patrick described, a great place for peer connection, and also to be the focus of a lot of fun and a lot of adult attention. We have great volunteers that are siblings, so they also know what the sibling experience is. So it's just really cool. Morgan, did you want to add anything to this conversation about what you think went really well and what you wish your parents might have done a little bit differently?
I do think my parents did a really good job of making sure that we had all the experiences of a normal childhood. We still went on trips, even though sometimes adjustments might need to be made. Like my dad and my little sibling might go to the car early before the rest of the family does. And as far as things I wish were done differently, I do wish that I could have been brought in to more of the doctor's appointments and things like that. Like Lawanda, I didn't really know about the formal diagnosis of my sibling for quite some time, and I feel like that would have been beneficial. And uh, I also think that right now, because I'm in a similar situation to Patrick, where I think I will be the guardian of my sibling once my dad passes away, I do wish that they bring me in more on maybe like their future planning, if they're doing that at all. I'm not really sure because I try to ask my sibling things when over text or when I'm up, but it's difficult to be, I'm 3 hours away from them. It's difficult to be 3 hours away and sort of mentally preparing to take on this role later on and not really have the direct contact. So I wish that more communication could be happening.
Okay. That sounds like a role that an organization like the ARC might facilitate so that we could bring some siblings in. I know when we do planning groups, we always invite the siblings to come as well, because parents really do have really mixed feelings about making that ask. And sometimes I think they think they're protecting you, but it's also leaves you feeling disconnected and uncertain and about what's going on. So it's interesting for me to hear all of you guys say that. The first question in the bar was about staying close to your sibling as you become adults. And it sounds like you all have remained very close. Feel free to say anything about that you like. But the second part of the question was your planning ahead, and how is the impact of having a sibling with a disability, how does that affect your thinking about your career choices, about starting your own families, about all those kinds of decisions in your future life, and how does having the sibling play into that? So I'm going to start with you, Irene.
Yes, my sister has influenced a lot of my decisions with, I saw in the Q&A they asked about like, where you go to college, what you plan on doing as a future career. So I'm actually from Long Island, New York. And so I came to Missouri, to St. Louis for college. And something that I didn't anticipate would be so challenging would be the fact that it's really hard to stay away from my sister, especially since she doesn't talk much in person, in the first place. And so I think, my parents and I thought that, oh, well, we'll video call often and I'll visit as much as I can. But what ended up or I should say what I ended up figuring out was that even if, we're on FaceTime with my sister, she doesn't understand that the person in the phone is me. And so she's not engaged and she won't look at the screen. And so it wasn't the same. And it was very difficult, especially that first year when felt so far away from her. And I felt like there was no real way to kind of have the same bond that I had when we were living in the same house. And so this past year, I've actually been a remote student from college, primarily because due to the COVID pandemic, my sister's schooling is all virtual. And so she needs someone to sit with her when she is attending her online school, to navigate the mouse and just to sit with her to make sure that she interacts with her teachers over Zoom. And so, in the majority of ways, the pandemic has had only negative consequences. But the one good thing that came out of it is that I get to spend more time with my sister and help her. And so that has been a really nice thing about the past year. And my experiences have also directly led into my career choices. I'm actually applying right now. I'm submitting the application in like a week to MD PhD schools. And so even before my sister received an autism diagnosis, I was kind of like, oh, maybe I want to be a doctor. Maybe I want to go into medicine. But I specifically want to gain both an MD and a PhD because I want to be part of discovering new research and treatments for people with intellectual disability and with autism spectrum disorders, as well as neurodevelopmental disorders in general, because they're all really intertwined. And so, yeah, that's directly fed into my future plans for sure.
So very interesting. Lots of choices then have been impacted, but some of them it sounds like have been really positively impacted. So that's kind of cool. Anybody else want to jump in on this one? Patrick?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in just because very similar to Irene, I do research. I am a political scientist and have recently embarked on a research project about the political participation of people with disabilities. And so I certainly wouldn't be as excited about that and maybe wouldn't even have pursued that if I didn't have my brother. To the other questions of, how do you keep in touch with them? I haven't lived with my brother for 9 years now. And it is really difficult. We try and have video calls when we can, and those are always great. My brother catches me up on everything by showing me the books he got at the library and what groceries they bought this week. But yeah, none of it compares to going home, and as soon as you put the lock in the door, if he knows you're coming, he'll just scream, "Big bro!" and jump into my arms, and that's great. But it does influence also where you think about living. If you think that you have a career where you might move a lot, whether that is feasible, or something like a PhD program where you're not going to make a lot of money until 5, 6, 7 years after. If something terrible happens, how will you take care of your sibling? And it's something that I think is always a little bit in the back of your mind. Yeah, it's just part of it.
That's really nuanced because I hadn't even really thought about like a career that you would travel a lot might never be something you want to consider. So that's an interesting piece. Lawanda, they're leaving it to you to talk about romance and relationships and siblings. So
That's funny. Goodness gracious, I forgot the question that you asked originally. Well, it was about how we kept up. Well, I pretty much said we've always have lived together. So that has never been something we had to be concerned about. Did it impact like what I chose to do when it came to schooling? It wasn't just my brother that impacted that. I believe that I stepped into the caregiver role way when I was a kid. When I lost my father, I lost him at 9. And I always just felt like my mom did work really hard, and I tried to be a very grateful, child, and, you know, just always wanting to make sure I was making her proud and making my father proud. I did not go off to college, but it wasn't just because of my brother. It was also because I didn't want to leave my mom. And I felt like she needed me, and I needed her. And losing her I was 26, and so losing her, that was pretty young. And I'm glad that I did not go away, honestly, or anything like that, because I would have missed a lot of time, with her. And I ended up having my daughter. So, like, just being able to have certain memories, even though those things weren't really planned, having those memories are good, for me. When it comes to like how it's affected my career, I'm a mama and a caregiver of my brother. So I've always worked pretty much like part-time hours. I make sure that everything works around the things that they have to do. My brother is actually a caretaker too, because he was a long time he watched my daughter while I went to work in the evenings. He would give her medicine. Back when she was really little, he used to change her diaper. I taught him a lot of things when she came home, and he picked up and got it. And even now, I can leave her with him, and that's another reason why we really still stay together too, because we really do help one another. As much as, people may think that he needs me, I actually need him as much. And it makes our relationship, I think, stronger, because we really do depend on one another. But it also makes it a little difficult, because when I have had feelings of wanting to just be in my relationship and be with my daughter without feeling like I had to care for him, it made it difficult and very, very emotional, because I felt like I didn't want him to think I was putting him out, putting him down, didn't want to be with him, things like that. So I have yet to make those decisions, but, and I don't really know how they'll pan out, but I will say that my significant other has, been on board the entire time, and he's, now if someone's pushing me to, get rid of him and all that stuff, he's on board and he understands what the dynamic of my family really is all about.
Nice. I love the fact that you talked about how much your brother helps out within the family. And I think sometimes people forget that there is this back and forth of people taking care of each other. So it's cool to me that you can identify all the things that your brother does to keep your family strong. So I love to hear that. Morgan, did you want to add anything into this conversation?
Oh yeah, I did see the question that mentioned being the oldest child, and I think that that definitely is a thing. And I think I've always felt pressure as the oldest child, especially the oldest daughter, to be there for my younger siblings, and especially my younger sibling with a disability. And that's even impacting my life now. I'm in a new relationship, sort of, and I've already asked him, like, would you be okay with living with my brother? Just because I want to get all this stuff out of the way early if I like this person. And so, yeah, it does impact my life, and the choices I make on the relationship level for myself personally. And then also, um, I do think about how to help my sibling with a disability navigate his own relationships. And my dad loves to avoid relationship conversations with his children, which worked out okay, I guess, for me. But I think that my little brother might need some more support. And so I might even be in the position to have the talk with him at some point, because I don't know if that's been happening yet. But uh, yeah, so it's definitely something that impacts the way I think about the roles I'll take on later. And really, I relate to what a lot of people said as well.
That's super interesting. I think most of the time brothers and sisters end up talking to each other about those things more than parent and child. So that makes sense to me. Although maybe less comfortable when it's a sister and a brother, but still I could see that that might be something that you get to be the one to have the conversation. I'm going to ask Irene and Lawanda specifically. You both kind of talked about cultural implications of how your culture has impacted your expectations of your role as a sibling. Can you talk a lot about that just a little bit more? All right,
Yeah.
Irene, unmuted first.
Yeah, sure. So I think, you know, as a lot of people have already touched upon, there is just in general the idea that siblings take care of take care of each other, you know. And so I think, you know, my parents are both from India, and so I guess maybe compared to mainstream American culture, they take it one step further, where family members just live together as much as possible. So like you'll often find like grandparents and the mom and dad and their children like all living under the same roof. So things are very interconnected in that way. And so I think, and in my family, and maybe this is not just culture specific, but because I only have one other sister, so because my parents only have two kids, there was a lot of pressure on me, not only as the oldest, but as like the only other child, you know, for just for general things, because all parents have plans for their kids, right? And so there are some things that my sister will never be able to accomplish, so it becomes even more important that I do. So there's definitely kind of a pressure in that sense as well. And yeah, I think was there a second part to what you were saying, Sharon?
Well, just the cultural implications. And I think you've talked about the pressure for you to be the achiever. In addition to being the caregiver, that is a lot of conflicting, potentially conflicting stuff to deal with. So interesting for me to think about that, Irene.
Yeah, I think no matter, you know, then that's definitely a consideration as I move on to thinking about graduate school. I'm going to try to pick a place where eventually my parents will come and move in with me, and my sibling will come and move in with me, and eventually it'll be me and my sibling. So definitely those are considerations, and it's just kind of so it's the way it's going to be.
All right, Lawanda.
Um, you know, the way I grew up is just the way I grew up. I did have an older set of parents. My it's hard to say. Like I know my parents are older. Like my mom would have been she would have been 70, and my father would have been like 80. And so they had us. You know, my mom she was about 26 when she had my brother, but I didn't come along so much later. And then I think like a lot of her own family dynamic had to do was just the way that we grew up. She grew up with her grandparents in a house full of all boys, and she was the only girl. And much like Miss Irene, it's just so it's me and my brother in the home. We have an older brother, but once our father passed away, he didn't really come around much anymore. So it's always just been me and my brother. A lot of people always thought that I was the big sister, much because of how I carry myself and take care of everything and speak for him and, so on and so on. But I think that the other thing is there just wasn't anyone else. Again, like Irene, like she's the only sibling, like no cousins or anybody that is going to step in because they don't live in your home or, anything like that. And a question I would have asked to my mom if I had an opportunity would be, did she have a plan for him? Because to my knowledge, there never was a plan of what to do with him once I passed away or, anything like that. No one ever talked to me about that, it just nothing. She went to the hospital one day and I remember having to make some tough decisions, but I remember asking him because one, he was the oldest and I felt like it was very important that he had input on what was happening with our mother and that any decisions I was going to make, that he would be okay with the decisions that I was going to make or we would ultimately make. And luckily, I did not have to make a decision to end her life or anything like that. You know what I mean? But it's just like as soon as that all happened, for coming to him, I said, hey. And I remember sitting with him the same way she sat with us when she told us about our father and just like trying to be there for, we're not very affectionate people, but just trying to be there with, for him emotionally and trying to understand maybe how this could be affecting him because I know how it affected me and it affected me tremendously and just trying to be there for him. I was just going to say, when I was 19, I began to work with mentally challenged people, not knowing that my daughter would actually end up, needing the support that she was going to need. And it has made me more understanding, and like, it has opened up my eyes to a lot of things. And it made me have more patience with my daughter and my brother in being in a field like this. I worked with special needs people, elderly, nursing. Like, I have been a caregiver from jump, and that's really what I guess maybe I feel like in some ways I was meant to be, you know what I mean? Because that's all I've ever done. And I'm sure that that influenced, it in some way or another. I'm sorry, but what was your question?
I just wondered, you just said that he didn't have a diagnosis and that he'd never really gotten involved with the systems. And I wonder if you thought that was a cultural choice or if you thought that was just your family dynamic.
I don't believe so. I have actually found papers where I've seen his IEP and things like that that my mom did with the school, because he was in public school, but he was just in special education. Unlike when my daughter came along, there was a school specifically for special needs kids. Now, that's not to say that it wasn't then. I just don't know how much she knew about it or how much people told her about it. Or maybe they didn't know, you know what I mean? A lot of times you just don't talk or you're quiet. It can mean a lot of things, not because you have an intellectual,
Sure.
disability. But when he got to high school, I remember reading over some of the paperwork that I found recently about his diagnosis, and it just has always been intellectual. Or, of course, I saw another question was talking about the degrading language, and I know we're going to get into that soon. But, the words that we don't use anymore, MR, and things like that. But other than that, I don't think my mom had the, I don't know, maybe the resources or the knowledge, that's the word I'm looking for, to say, hey, I think he could be on the spectrum. She just didn't know those things. And she herself did not graduate from high school. So to her, this was normal. You know what I mean? How her son was, or, knowing that he may have needed those extra supports when he came to school, it was just normal. And so I don't necessarily think it was cultural. And he did have programs. My mom was really big into programs for us as children. So, but knowing about like the regional center, I didn't know about some of that stuff until I started working with the people that needed and use regional center, and start realizing like I could have been getting this or I could have been getting that. Like, I had no idea all the resources that are available to you. And his disability definitely came before with 18, 21, those questions. And the fact that like, no, it seemed like nobody knew anything. And I really started digging and, cracking into what resources were available.
Thank you, Lawanda. All right, I'm going to do a quick round of questions. I've got 3 questions. So I'm going to go around and have you guys just answer them in 1 or 2 sentences, which is going to be really hard. So I'm going to start off with people that work at some place like the St. Louis school district or whatever. One piece of advice you would give them about reaching out to siblings or supporting siblings. Patrick.
I would say really just reach out, ask how they're doing, how they're coping. It really isn't a thing that people ask. And so they keep these feelings inside.
Beautiful. Morgan.
I think that if you're working with the person who has the disability and they have a very strong relationship with their sibling, speaking to them together rather than with the sibling and the parent, other things might come up, things they haven't told their parents that they want for the future, or their behavior might even be a little different. You might learn more about them that way. And it's really beneficial to work with the family as a system, I think, because siblings, regardless of disabilities, know if something's up. They know if someone's uncomfortable. So it's really important to bring everyone in, I think, and just reach out like Patrick said.
Cool. Irene or Lawanda, do you want to say anything else? Irene says yes.
I was about to say something really similar to Morgan, like, get to know the entire family. And I guess, Google is your best friend. If however way you found out about the St. Louis Arc, there's so many people that you can contact and learn about those resources. And I'm happy to share my email. I'm sure everyone here is happy to share emails if you want to reach out and get information about other resources as well.
Lawanda, what advice would you give to to younger brothers and sisters who have a sibling with a disability?
I think I would just tell them to treat them like you would treat anyone else. I think it's important to, like I said in the beginning, you don't want to have what I think a lot of people end up having is pity on their siblings, or, feeling sorry for them because they may not be able to do one thing or the other. But I think it's important to find things that you can do together. Our biggest thing that kind of like connected us was church. We were church kids. We were in the choir. We were on the usher board. Like, we did things all the time, and there was never anything different. My mom did not treat us different, or anything like that. So I would say to just treat them like they're your brother and your sister, and make sure that, if possible, take up for them if they definitely can't take up for themselves.
Cool. Patrick, do you have anything you'd tell siblings?
Really just accept your feelings as valid. You're gonna get frustrated, you're gonna have some difficulties that shouldn't scare you. You are facing something that's difficult, and it's okay to be scared. But you are trying to care for your sibling as best as you can, almost instinctually, and keep up that instinct.
Excellent. Either you guys want to add anything on to that? Irene or Morgan? No? All right. So we have just a couple minutes left. I'm going to ask you a big question at the end, which is, what is your dream for your sibling for the future? Morgan, I'm going to start with you.
I would say being able to be as independent as possible, because I know my sibling really wants to be more independent, and maybe his cognitive age is younger. So just understanding that where he's at and getting him those supports, I'm really hoping he'll have.
Sounds great. Irene?
I guess my hope for my sister's future is that she never loses the things that make her excited, and she always kind of keeps, like, she gets such joy out of simple things, like we all do. And I just hope that she continues to experience all those things. She might never become independent, but as long as she is able to stay happy and everything, and we're all there to support her, then that would be my best dream.
Cool. Wanda?
For me, it would be to continue to allow him to be as independent as he can be, and hopefully eventually he can have his own apartment with support, proper support, be it me or an agency that provides them. But to just be able to know that he can live on his own, because he has a lot of skills that were taught to him, by my parents, and then of course enhanced by me. And I think that he has the ability to do a lot more than people probably give him credit for, including me. So, and just continue to support him, and I want him to be happy.
Much like Morgan and LaWanda, I really want him to have as much independence as he can. In the past few years, he's had this tremendous growth, and I'm so proud of him. He's gotten a lot better at communicating, using a device. He's cooking his own meals. He's working a little bit, and it's so gratifying to see, especially because you have these worries, when you are their caretaker, what are you going to do when you have to go to work? Are they going to be able to be on their own? And these are difficult, scary things, but I would say don't underestimate your sibling or child with a disability, because they can do a lot more than you think they can.
Beautiful. I'm so sad that we're out of time. I still have so many things I would love to ask. So thanks, you guys. I really appreciate your being here. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Have a great week. Bye.
You too. Thank you.